It's Mazzy, and welcome back to the channel. You're about to see a conversation I recently had with Amelia Davis, the owner, curator, archivist of Jim Marshall Photography. Now, Jim Marshall passed in 2010. We're here to discuss this upcoming book, The Grateful Dead by Jim Marshall, photos and stories from the formative years 1966 to 1977. If you don't know Jim, you certainly know his images, his photography. One, let me just show one of his most famous ones, Allman Brothers, live at the Fillmore East. And his most famous photograph, which we discuss in this interview, this chat, is Johnny Cash. This is a book that came out some years ago. There's a bunch of different photo books, from the Monterey Jazz Festival to the Haight-Ashbury to just an overview catalog of his work. Without further ado, Amelia Davis. The Grateful Dead by Jim Marshall, photos and stories from the formative years 1966 to 1977. And this is an interview with Amelia Davis. And I'll give you a little background, then she can pontificate and continue on with this. Jim Marshall died in 2010, and I knew him since around 1980. I first met him. And one of the great music photographers, not just rock, famous pictures of Coltrane, Miles Davis. Amelia was left Jim's archive. Amelia was Jim's assistant, now an archivist, has done about 8 books now, and I have a big stack of them here over the years, curating to a beautiful extent his collection. And there was a documentary that came out around the time of the pandemic. I want to talk a little bit of that too, but this is celebrating the 60th anniversary this year of the Grateful Dead. And it says here he took more than 10,000 photos of the Dead, in this case between 1966 and 77. So Amelia, thanks for doing this with me.
Thank you for having me. I love talking about Jim and keeping his legacy alive. So it's always nice to share Jim.
And you do it so well. I mean, those are people who knew Jim. Jim was like a yin yang person, a little bit of a cat, a little bit of a pussy cat, especially around women. His bark, it was bigger than his bite in most cases, but he was a great photographer, and he was a reportage journalistic photographer, not a studio portrait photographer. In fact, I remember him talking to me about some assignment he got late, like in the 90s, and he would bring on assistants to light for him because that's not his thing.
Yeah.
But talk about uh, your relationship with him and how this whole thing came about. And then specifically, let's get with this book, this Grateful Dead book. Comes out August 5th on Chronicle Books, by the way.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I was Jim's assistant for the last 13 years of his life. So I first started working for Jim in 1998. So he was, older at that time and wasn't really photographing anymore because the music industry had changed and he didn't have full access, which he demanded and wanted for his photographs. So the only time he would photograph people is if the musicians told their managers, Jim has complete access, let him do this. And so, that's how he photographed like Lenny Kravitz and John Mayer, and Slash and people like that. But he usually, what we did were going through and organizing his archive. And Jim would also, he was selling through galleries, so we would make prints and deal with galleries. But throughout the years of me working with Jim, he told me a lot of his stories firsthand. And I regret that I didn't record it.
Uh,
It's one of those things that it's an afterthought. So anybody out there who works with an older photographer or somebody who has a wealth of knowledge on literature or whatever, you know, just on your cell phone, hit record and just let it go. But I have those memories in my head, and so I try and share them with people when I can, the firsthand knowledge that I have.
I would say also people should seek out the documentary. What's the name of it again?
It's called Show Me the Picture, the story of Jim Marshall. And
But there's more. Isn't it
about
guns?
No, no, that's just a tagline. Cars, guns, and
Oh,
cameras.
but that's a great line. If you know Jim Marshall, know his history. That's an important line in the history, and it's a no uncensored look at Jim Marshall, who was a I don't want to say volatile character, but a
Yeah.
volatile character.
Yeah, he was he was erratic, let's say. And he wasn't predictable at times. And but the thing about Jim and what I wanted to do with this documentary, I didn't want to edit Jim because a lot of times when somebody dies and their estate takes it over, they kind of want to edit and make it more approachable and
You
acceptable.
whitewash it.
Yeah, and Jim, Jim lived his life the way he wanted to. And he always said, I don't regret how I lived my life. Um, and so he was very open and honest about it. He had a severe cocaine addiction. And when I first started working for Jim, he still was doing cocaine at the at the ripe age of like 70. Or in his late 60s. But it's one of those things where it was a demon and he did stop. So the last 4 years of his life, he wasn't doing cocaine. He was drinking though. And it's
Yeah.
the alcohol that eventually killed him.
Well,
But
every time I would run into him, and I usually ran into him in restaurants and bars, not just bars with food at least,
yeah,
restaurants.
yes.
And I remember I ran into him once at a bar with a writer who was working on a book for him in the UK. I forgot that guy's name.
Oh, Dave Brolin.
Yeah, and we were over by the Embarcadero, and then we went over to Luna Park after that. A lot of these places I might be mentioning are San Francisco specifics, but that's really a part of this book. This is San Francisco history. That's also why I latch on. I remember after he passed, the APA, which is used to be called the Advertising Photographers of America. I don't know what it's called now, but Association of Professional Photographers or something. And I wrote a little three-part tribute of my three stories. I won't tell them all here, but the one I remember when you mentioned his cocaine problem, I was at the Sunset Marquis in LA and I was sitting at the bar. It was early, and there were photographs of Jim. He had a show up, or I don't know how long it was temporary.
Because the whiskey bars were in the Sunset Marquis and also at the Mondrian, the Sky Bar. Randy Gerber owned them. So Jim was,
And it's funny, I ran into both places. But anyway, I was sitting at the bar, and and I said, "Oh, Jim Marshall's photographs." And the guy tells me that, "Oh yeah, Jim's banned from the hotel because he threw a chair through the window or something by the pool." And I was sitting there for maybe 20 minutes, and all of a sudden, I hear this voice, "What the fuck are you doing here, Maslov?" And it was Jim Marshall in the front there. And so it just was so funny that he was there, but he was there to get some uh, product, I would say. That was it. So
yeah. Well, anybody also who knew Jim knew he hated onions and he would throw a fit. He hated them.
I didn't know that.
Oh, and that's why when he was at the Sunset Marquis, he ordered room service. He ordered a hamburger and he said, no onion.
God.
And so it arrived and it had onions. And that's when he said, what the fuck don't you understand about no onions? And he threw it through the window and it landed in the pool. And so then he heard a knock on the door. And I said, Mr. Marshall, gather your things. You're no longer welcome here. So he gathered his things. He walked across the street to the Mondrian Hotel. He said, do you take credit cards? They said, yes, we do. Gave it to him. And that was the hotel that he went to after.
That
after
was that. There's everyone has a story of meeting Jim Marshall and hanging and I tell you, it was a pleasure to know Jim. I think I still own about five of his photographs and everything. But what you said strikes a nerve about him being uh, needing and wanting and demanding all access for a photographer. Now we know in the concert that has changed. Now I was at a Devo show here at the Woodland Park Zoo last week, and through the band's people, I got in, and the same thing. I knew a couple photographers who were there photographing. What happens is with all these events, usually you get one song. You get in the pit in the front of the stage. Maybe you get two songs. This guy, because he was connected to the band, got more. I don't know if he got all access. But Jim would not allow that. You know, back in the days of Bill Graham and stuff, initially he could have all access and doing all those bands. If you've seen his work of Cream when they came to San Francisco, and I mean, I could show all these books, and I know we're here not to promote other books, but this is a book that everyone should have. I mean, we're here promoting the Grateful Dead book, but this is probably one of the better overviews, overviews. Show me the picture, and it's an incredible shot right there. Is that Peter Frampton
Peter Frampton.
meeting Jimi Hendrix or photographing Jimi Hendrix on the Panhandle? Aside from, or maybe it was the Monterey.
Monterey Pop, and then he came after Monterey Pop. Jimmy came to San Francisco and did a free concert in the Panhandle.
And that's
So,
the one I
yeah,
missed. I didn't know about that. I would have ridden my bike there. But he
yeah,
talked about talking to Hendrix and because he's James Marshall and Jimmy is James Marshall and the amplifiers are James Marshall, that whole triumphant of
yeah,
Marshall in rock and roll music. So
yeah.
okay, let's talk about what I like about this. There are essays in here. It's not just a photo book, but obviously the primary direction is Jim's photography of the dead. But there's a great series, and I like how it says people and places. And that's something that I like to do in my channel with my personal stories of growing up in San Francisco. But there's a section here, they talk about the people, the Grateful Dead family. Obviously, it's the band, the extended family with Rock Scully, a co-manager, and Mountain Girl and Sam Cutler, who was her tour manager. And it goes into people that surrounds that part of the airplane, Bill Graham, Jim Capaldi, the Eric Clapton, people from Traffic and The Who, the British bands that would play with the Dead, mostly in San Francisco, but in some other things. Dusty Street from KSAN Radio, the DJ KMPX. But then there's a wonderful place that I really connect with about places, and it really goes through these places that represent some of the photographs in from Longshoremen's Hall. I believe that's where the Ken Kesey acid tests
Yep, that was
were. I
Exodus.
was too young for that, but I think is that the first time Jim photographed the dead?
It was, yeah. It was at that acid test.
Okay. 710 Ashbury. Obviously, I feel bad for those owners of that house. Uh, but they do have a gate in front, but especially this coming weekend with this
Oh my God, I
Dead and
know.
Company tour. The airplane house doesn't seem to get as much
Attention.
I was going to say crazies, but attention should be better. Obviously, the Fillmore, the original Fillmore, of course, it moved to there was the Fillmore and the Fillmore West. That's on here too. Obviously, the Panhandle, Golden Gate Park, the Polo Field, Speedway Meadows, Lindley Meadows, Family Dog, and so on and so forth. Straight Theater, that was the Hate Theater, and turned to the Straight Theater. But okay, now how did this come about? Was this in conjunction with the Dead for their 60th anniversary, or did you? And David Gans, by the way, who is a great Dead writer, Deadhead. I've met him once or twice over the years. Uh, Curated this with you.
He did. And so it came up. All things aside, I'm not a deadhead. Um, I'm a photographer that loves Jim's photography that I consider photojournalism. He was really like a photojournalist. So for me, this book, I kind of learned about the Grateful Dead through the photos. And with David Gans, who is a historian of the Grateful Dead and a wealth of knowledge, and we were doing an event for Show Me the Picture. We were screening Show Me the Picture,
Okay.
and we started talking. And this was 3 years ago. And he said, you know, have you ever done a Grateful Dead book of Jim's work? And I said, no, I haven't. And he goes, well, the 60th anniversary is coming up in 2026. It might be a good idea. And I thought about it and I said, you're right. And I said, do you want to do it together? And he said, absolutely. So we spent 3 years combing through Jim's archive, and Jim had a 3x5 card on every single person he ever photographed. And on that 3x5 card has the corresponding proof sheet numbers and the negative numbers. So because he was a working photographer, he had to be able to access his work quickly. If Rolling Stone called up and said, what do you got on Jimi Hendrix? He could pull his card and find Jimi Hendrix photos really quickly. So, but what he didn't do was cross-reference. So with the Grateful Dead, he had a Grateful Dead card, but he didn't cross-reference. So if the Dead was playing with Jefferson Airplane, it might be on the Jefferson Airplane card, not the Grateful Dead's card. So we had to go through a huge amount of material to cross-reference and find a lot of stuff that people haven't seen because it wasn't cross-referenced. And we found this one sheet, I love it. I can't remember what I was looking for, but it was a proof sheet, and on the top was a band, and the bottom was it was a little overexposed. And I'm like, what is that? And I looked at it, and it's a Grateful Dead in 710 Ashbury in 1966 that had never, it
Wow.
wasn't anywhere. And I love those photos. And the band before it, I found out the name of the band was Sparrow.
Oh,
That,
Steppenwolf,
yeah. So he had photographed Sparrow and he hadn't used the whole roll of film. And so that the second half of the roll of film were the Grateful Dead.
which is rare for him not using the whole roll of film, it seems like.
Well,
I
he
mean,
kind
maybe you
of,
see a lot of that. I don't know.
yeah, there's because he never wasted film, right? So he was going from one event to another, and he had five cameras around his neck all the time, loaded with film,
Mostly Tri-X film, right? That he would keep
triax black and white.
sometimes. Now, he does color, but I think his primary thing is black and white. There are
Yeah.
color shots, and I think, no, I always get
Kodachrome
confused.
slide film. A lot of people don't realize that, but it was actually slide film. And Kodachrome had really vibrant, beautiful colors,
Yeah.
and that's why he loved to use it.
Right, right. And I remember junior high school and high school, I took photography. It turned out I'm a better managing photographers and like maybe like you, I don't know your work, but there's a talent for promoting and negotiating and working with photographers. And I remember over the years I connected with Jim a little about that. In fact, one other story I got to throw in. I think it was in the 90s. Maybe you were working with him then, late 90s. I go to New York 3 times a year to show my portfolios. Now my photographers are advertising people, totally different. And I ran into him the day before in a bar or something in a restaurant, and he goes, "What's up?" I said, "I'm going to New York tomorrow to show portfolios." He goes, "Why don't you take my work?" And I remember, I mean, he was kind of halfway serious, halfway And I said, "I would represent you in a minute if you were dead." And he goes, "Oh, fuck you, Maz." I mean, you could, when you know him, you could
Yeah,
say shit like that.
yeah,
I was not serious, but obviously, having people like this, and we all know that Jim, and whether you go to Henry Diltz or any of the music photographers of the 60s into the 70s, there was like a vacuum period.
yeah,
Weren't doing really well. I was buying prints from Jim for $75, the John Lennon garbage can where they
yeah,
crop out Ralph Gleason.
yeah,
Um, you know, and around that work furlough time when he was doing that for that year or two, whatever it was. But obviously, the boomers grew.
yeah.
The CD era, and remember, Jim has you probably I don't know if it's the same person, but a great copyright attorney. That
Mhm.
every time when the CD era came, he was one of the first photographers that would get more when they transferred to CDs. I didn't sell my work for a compact disc cover. And also it blossomed with box sets.
Yeah,
Janis Joplin, Big Brother, Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead. You could license images, Miles Davis,
yeah,
for that. And so I don't want to say it's a cash cow, but there was a market for him. Even he didn't have to shoot, and he
right.
made a modest living. Every once in a while, you'd
Yeah,
all that Johnny Cash picture he took has
yeah.
probably ripped off more than anything else.
The most ripped off photo. And, Jim was really, I think, ahead of his time business wise because he was never a work for hire. He was always an independent. And by being independent photographer, he owned all the copyrights. Whereas if you are work for hire for a music agency or a label, you don't own those copyrights. They do.
I want to
So,
explain that to some of the audience. You just explained it, but I had that happen a lot because, again, most of my photographers work with ad agencies and sometimes with magazines. Condé Nast was a good example. You'd get the contract and they would want to own everything. And as an agent, it's our jobs to cross all that shit out. And
yep,
and I know young photographers sometimes are afraid to do that, especially now. But even back then, don't be afraid. If they want you, if you're that special, you can cross those things out. And I remember with Condé Nast, they would own everything, and I'd say, no, I'll give you exclusive rights for so many months, and then we retain the rights, and we
right.
pre-negotiate maybe some future things. And then
Yeah,
they would say, okay, we'll send you the other contract. They always knew that they're, I mean, you know, Annie Leibovitz wasn't going to give her rights away, or Jim Marshall,
Yeah,
or Herb Ritz, or the name people, the
right.
celebrity photographers wouldn't. And good for Jim, man. He pioneered a lot of stuff during that transition, and he owned that copyright. You know, owning your rights to photography is like owning your catalog of music, owning your publishing too. And
100%.
all the power to him.
Yeah, yeah. And also Jim didn't have any children. His photos were his children. And so he really protected his children fiercely when he was alive. And he said, I've protected them. And now as I'm older, they're protecting me. They're taking care of me, which is true. Because he was just so vigilant about anybody who, used his work without his permission. For him, it was stealing and it was exploiting his children. And he just would not stand for that. So,
One of my favorite, this is one of my few favorite color shots he did. Not that the shot's great, but it's great because who's in the shot. And I want to talk about this a little because don't remember ever seeing the shots leading up to this. Maybe he's been in another book. You can tell me about this. This is
oh,
Golden Gate Park near the Panhandle, I guess Golden Gate Park.
Golden
And
Gate.
these are the five major, in theory, San Francisco bands. Like the Dynasty, it's Jefferson Airplane, the Grateful Dead, um,
Quicksilver,
Quicksilver Messenger Service, Dan Hicks, and
the Charlatans.
the Charlatans. And the
Yep.
funny part of that is when you really think about it, the Charlatans, maybe they didn't quite. Where's Moby Grape? Or you could argue about that.
Janice Big Brother is in there too.
Right. Oh, who is?
Janice Joplin and Big
Oh
Brother.
yeah, Big Brother, right, Big Brother. So that's the great shot. Okay,
Yeah.
look at that shot. Now, I love this shot. This is all of them walking, I guess, from Haight Street. They're all like this group. There's John Cipollina from Quicksilver there.
Hmm?
All the bands are walking to this photo
Shoot.
setup, in Golden Gate Park, which is only a few blocks away.
And that's another one that has never been published. And I found that it was just one strip on another proof sheet of something completely different.
It's
So
just
that to me, I love that because it just really illustrates he got so frustrated. He said it was like herding cats, you know?
can you imagine? And then, of course, here's the managers.
Yep. The
Uh,
five managers.
Those of you who watch my show know I recently did a thing on Moby Grape, and conspicuous in his absence is the you talk about someone being a fucker, and I hate to say this to the dead, but Matthew Katz, who managed It's a Beautiful Day and Moby Grape and owning their name, and I'm sorry, uh,
Mm,
that to me just it wrecks the spirit of those bands in there. So
yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of conversation here and essays, aside from people who work with the dead, major essays, then there's a lot of little vignettes from Mountain Girl, who is Jerry Garcia's girlfriend throughout, and has a lot of great stories of that time. Are those contemporary conversations?
Yes. So David Gans set them up because he knows the people very well. And then we would get on a Zoom conversation with them. And it was wonderful. They were so open and honest and they loved doing it because it brought them back to that time too. And one of the things that I discovered, yeah, Rosie McGee, who was Phil Lesh's girlfriend at the time, um, what a big role the women played
Oh yeah.
in the history, and it's never talked about and it's never really recognized. And people don't realize that the women were the ones that were supporting the band because they played for free a lot of times and they would do all these pop-ups in Golden Gate Park. So it's not like they were having money coming in. So the women brought in the money and
They
Sue
started the merchandising, the
exactly.
t-shirts.
They did. And Suzela, who was Bill Kreutzmann's wife, she had a used clothing store. She's in there. There's a photo of Bill Kreutzmann and Suzela. She had a used clothing store across in Marin. And Mountain Girls said they did the first tie-dye shirt and it sold. And they were like, maybe we should do some more of these.
You
So
think?
they were really the first ones that came up with the tie-dyed shirts.
This is, to me, an unusual shot for Jim. As much as I like it, it seems like a studio setup and this beautiful natural lighting. It's kind of like the cover of With the Beatles, Robert Freeman's photograph of the Beatles from Meet the Beatles, where he just says he had them in a hallway in a hotel and he pulled the window back and got them. It's not put
No,
together,
not staged.
retouched, anything. And this is one of those beautiful,
The natural light coming in.
Jim
And that,
Marshall just had he would snap a lot. And sometimes, obviously, with photographers, and not to take away from any photographer, there are accidental shots you get. Just you capture that moment because that's why you shoot so much. Now, people shoot more because it's digital and you're not worried about the price, but you would shoot things, but people blink and people are, picking their nose or whatever the thing is. And Jim would just go, he would, in a way, be rude. I think in this book, there's a thing of Herbie Green, who I've met a few times over the years. And he would talk about, Jim would just be rude and just go in, Herbie didn't want to like be rude and encroach on someone when they're doing maybe a private moment or something.
right. Yeah, Herbie was more studio
Yeah.
and he really liked to set it up and do that kind of stuff. And Jim, he said Jim would kick down the door to get the shot. And so Jim, he did. He would go into backstage, on stage. I mean, he would just take photographs, but everybody was so used to Jim being there and always having cameras around his neck. It was like he wasn't there. So he was able to really get these unguarded moments because he was just there, that's Jim. Yeah, okay, whatever. And they kept on doing their thing. But they also trusted him enough to
Yeah.
allow him into those
And he
situations.
captured those moments beautifully. I'd run into Jim, and he wasn't a hard sell to me. Every time I'd mention, oh, I like this, he goes, oh, you can come by and I'll sell you a print and everything else. And and sometimes I would do it. I have a Woody Allen print during the KQED interview of him. I have the John Lennon again, the garbage can print. I have, the one I got sold during that time was unfortunately the Dylan rolling the tire down. I can't believe I got rid of that. And these were when, his prints weren't cheap, but they were reasonable. As a photo agent, and I tell people all the time is these artists, yes, you can print a bunch of stuff for negatives. And again, editions are never, quote, limited. There's always a different edition. You can have a 11 by 14 edition, 8 by 10 edition. You can have a 1970s, a vintage edition, or usually when the artist was alive to print. I mean, you can have a platinum print. You have to value the artist. It's not that, oh, it only took you 2 minutes. And I had that used to be up against then. People didn't understand photographers. Well, it's only going to take her 2 hours to do the shoot. Why are you charging X? Well, 2 hours and 40 years learning how to take this picture and
Yeah,
licensing. And it's a different when you're doing a portrait for someone personally than
right.
doing
Very different.
commercial. But Jim Marshall did stuff for himself as well as assignments. He went on the road
Yeah.
for, I guess, Life magazine
Live Teen Set magazine, which was huge in the 60s. He did stuff. Yeah, he would also bring them stories. So he would think of things that he wanted to photograph and then approach magazines sometimes. And then they would say, okay, yeah, go ahead and bring us that story. And then assign a writer with Jim. And so, you know, that's that's how he got a lot of stuff that wasn't necessarily music. So he's got, I know this is off topic, but peace. Yeah, I mean this is
who
why
would have thought Jim Marshall?
I
Talk about this
know.
for a second. I know we're
The
off
Grateful Dead.
topic, but we're here for the Grateful Dead. But okay, let's talk about this.
No, peace. And that's why I say Jim was a photojournalist. So he never left home without his Leica cameras around his neck because he never wanted to miss something. So, like the peace symbol, it caught his eye and he's like, hey, I keep seeing this peace symbol everywhere. And so he did a whole photo essay on the peace symbol, where most photographers would just walk past it and wouldn't think twice about it. And that was the beauty of Jim is he saw things and recorded them. And I just think it's wonderful because they're pieces of a history, really, that don't necessarily happen again. And Jim
Whatever
documented
whatever
it.
year this, we'll have to look. What year did this come out? You would be able, 2016 or something?
Yeah, I think it was around 16,
I
17.
remember every year at Christmas, I would give my clients, good clients, because I remember one year I bought 50 copies of this book
Wow.
and gave it out to art producers, art buyers, photo editors. Got an introduction here by Shepard Fairey.
Yeah.
the artist. But this is a cool little book. This is a good gift book. So it was the
It's
perfect Christmas book to give out. And it's a surprise being by Jim Marshall. Let's have a little shot of Jim Marshall there just to show you. I'll do a few cutaways probably in this video. Another book I just want to show because it's one of my favorites. This is a heavy book for you jazz fans, is this, the
Jazz festival. Yeah.
Monterey Jazz Festival. I went there about 3 times, and
Yeah.
he photographed it, what, I guess in the 60s mostly?
Yeah, in the 60s, for sure. But Jerry Stahl, who was the photographer for the Monterey Jazz Festival, he was a San Francisco photographer. He was Jim's mentor. He was about 10 years older than Jim. And he's actually the one that taught Jim to number his proofs and negatives and correspond them to the person's name. So he learned that from Jerry Stahl
Wow.
very early on. Yeah.
I like we have 3 native San Franciscans here we're representing. We got Amelia, myself, and Jim Marshall, all born in different times. We're kind of different generations, I guess 3 generations really.
Yeah.
How old was Jim when he passed?
74. He was born in 1936. So
Oh,
he actually was born in Chicago. And when they were three, his family moved to California.
oh, so he's sort of a
Consi-
poser.
Yeah, I still consider him a native.
Of course, of course. Well, he went to New York and he came back to San Francisco. How great is that?
He
And he's
did.
one of the early people for the like photographing the dead. I read in here. Of course, I knew that, but Rolling Stone, when Rolling Stone was like the counterculture magazine, he was one of the early ones
Yeah,
with, I guess, Baron Wolman and Annie Leibovitz
yeah.
early on. And I could just imagine talking to Jim and negotiating with Jim back then, what that was like.
It would have been crazy.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what else to say. Tell me anything. Oh, one thing, I love that Chronicle books, and this is not known to everyone. You know Owsley's blotter acid? Have you heard of that? Well, look at what they include in here.
I know. Isn't that beautiful? I know.
Now, will this, well, we don't know if that's going to give you a little trip thing. Uh, but Chronicle books, in closing,
They
just
did a beautiful, Chronicle Books did a great job. And what I really loved is they collaborated with us and really let us tell the story through Jim's photos and tell the story through the interviews of the people. And one of the things we wanted to do, yeah, that's great. Well, we were
quite the
once,
pretty boy.
he really was.
Once you switch to the Izods and the shorts, the car, I don't know. I don't know.
That was a bad period of their look. But what I love about the book too is it's really about the family and the time that the Grateful Dead was there. So many times if you get the band members, they tell stories and over time it becomes a legend and it's not really true and they misrepresent. This was more about the neighborhood and the family and what was happening at that time. We wanted it to be very intimate and welcoming so people felt like they could come in and be part of that. And I think we accomplished that. And I'm really happy about that.
That's such an important thing. I mean, in a way, I feel so touched. Looking at this book, it brings back a lot of memories. Because not just I was born there. We moved down to Menlo Park too for a while. That's why, like, I lived in Menlo Park. Remember going to Kepler's books, and I didn't know anything about the Warlocks. So this year in 1965, they changed their name to Grateful Dead. But that stuff, I remember my friends' parents would go to where Hippie Hill it was, right off of Standian there at Haight Street in the park. And they would let us, we were what, 12 and a half, 13 years old. We'd walk down Haight Street on the weekends when you had all those cars. Everyone was selling the Berkeley Barb and it wasn't a scary thing. I wouldn't let my son walk down there at 12 or 13
Right.
today in that situation alone. And it was beautiful. And that was one of those summers in 67. We always joke about, oh, the summer of love. It wasn't as good really as 66, but it was one of those rare sunny summers in San Francisco, especially in that neighborhood. And it brings back that music, going to the print mint, going to the psychedelic shop, going even the mom and pop stores that were there. It was a special time, and the Grateful Dead were certainly, along with the Jefferson Airplane. I usually prefer the airplane if I had to pick one, but they are the ones that lasted. I was talking to someone yesterday. They represent San Francisco, kind of like Pearl Jam represents Seattle. Yeah, we had Nirvana, we had all this stuff, but Pearl Jam outlasted them all.
Yeah.
It's like a football team here. Grateful Dead are like the what the 49ers were here, like the Seahawks. And this really is a good overview. And again, I'm a big fan of Jim Marshall's work. Look on my channel for the other Jim Marshall related videos. And Amelia, thank you so much for this. Beautiful book. I'm a
Thank you.
fan.
And I hope, thank you for letting me reminisce about Jim and talk about him because I think
Well,
he's
you've carried his legacy on more. I can't imagine anyone else because, as you know, an archive could be sold off and stripped
right.
apart. And I just saw in the last couple of days, Michael Oakes passed away of the Michael Oakes Archive, and you know, brother of Phil Oakes. And I always wondered how did he get the copyright to all these images with all those photographers? Not to diss him, but he amassed an amazing collection from the labels and photographers of music related photography.
Yeah.
And I always wondered, like you said, Jim registered his copyright, owned his work, kept retained it. I don't know how that guy did it. And every time you'd see a collection, Mike from the Michael Oakes archive, I don't get it.
Well, he when he sold it to Getty, he sold everything, including other people's
That's
photographs.
what I mean.
That's right. And so Jim, Jim was so angry. And when some of Jim's images would appear on Getty, he would sue them. He'd say,
Of
that
course he
is
would.
not Michael Oakes. That is my photograph. And, it happened with a lot of other photographers. So Getty is kind of used to being sued now from photographers.
I'm going to close out with one story. I remember running to him right by his place off of 16th and Market there, right in front of Cafe Floor.
Mhm.
And he just bought a new BMW. I don't know if you remember that. And there was an ad for, I believe it was Calvin Klein, and it was shot backstage at the Warfield Theater with these models, black and white, beautiful photograph. And not to take away from the photographer, but on the wall where the rigging is for the stage rigging and everything. There was one of his pictures of, I think it was the one of Bill Graham flipping off, and it was backstage. And probably if this is the frame of the spread, a magazine spread, maybe the photograph was that big right there. And he sued, and like, I don't know how much it was, but it was enough for him to go buy a brand new BMW
Yep.
the next day. I
Yeah,
just love that story.
I know. That's
Jim
Jim.
Marshall, we miss you. We love you.
We love you.
Yeah. I'll do a toast for him tonight. But again, thank you again,
Yeah,
Amelia.
thank you.
And Mazzy loves you. Take care, everyone.